I can still remember the dust hanging in the air, the scream of sirens, and the ground trembling beneath my feet when I found her, half buried under rubble, her eyes fixed on mine as if I was the only thing keeping her alive. I couldn't leave her there. I woke up before dawn, same as always, to the sound of the old heater rattling in the corner. The clock said 5 a.m., but my body was already used to it. I moved quietly through the apartment so I wouldn't wake Noah. The place wasn't much, just 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, and a window that looked straight into another building. But it was ours. Every corner of it carried proof that we'd made it work, somehow. The coffee pot hissed to life while I straightened my tie over a white shirt that had seen better days. On the counter sat Noah's little cardboard robot, one leg dangling by a strip of tape. I smiled and picked it up carefully, fixing the leg with a dab of glue from the junk drawer. That robot had been his favorite project, built from cereal boxes and old screws I brought home from work. For a kid his age, he was pretty handy, maybe too much like me. I worked as a mechanical engineer for a small firm in the city. The job paid enough to survive, not enough to breathe easy. Between rent, groceries, and the last of the medical bills from Sarah's accident 3 years ago, I'd learned to make every dollar count. Still, I'd been grateful for stability. Until today. Today could change everything. Montgomery Corporation had called me back for the final round of interviews. One of the biggest engineering firms on the West Coast, solid benefits, triple the pay, a future worth fighting for. I'd already beaten out nearly 200 other applicants. If I landed this job, Noah and I could finally stop scraping by. Maybe I could even give him the kind of life Sarah used to dream about before the world flipped upside down. By the time the coffee was ready, Noah was stirring. He padded into the kitchen with his blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, hair sticking up every which way. "Big day, Daddy?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. I slid a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. "Big day," I said, smiling. "If I do well today, we might get to move somewhere with a backyard. Maybe even a place big enough for a real workshop." His eyes lit up. "And pizza every Friday?" That one hit me harder than I expected. Such a small dream, and it told me everything about the life we'd been living. Counting small joys because the big ones were too expensive. I forced a smile past the tightness in my throat. "When I get the job, we'll have pizza every Friday. Promise." He grinned like I'd just offered him the moon. That look, that pure trust, was what got me through the hard days. I wanted him to believe that the world could be kind, even if it hadn't been to me. At 7 sharp, we walked down the narrow staircase that always smelled like someone else's cooking. The morning fog hung thick over the Mission District, and the air carried the faint sound of traffic waking up. I walked Noah to the school gate, crouched to his level, and straightened his backpack strap. "Good luck, Daddy," he said, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You're the best engineer in the whole world." I laughed softly. "And you're the best kid in the whole world. I'll see you at 3, okay?" He nodded and ran toward the entrance, waving before disappearing inside. I stood there for a second longer, watching that small figure vanish into the crowd of kids, and felt the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. This was it, the day everything could turn around. I checked my watch. 7:45. The interview was at 9:30 downtown. Just enough time to get there, just enough time to change our lives. I straightened my jacket, took a deep breath, and headed for the train station, carrying hope like a fragile piece of glass I couldn't afford to drop. The fog was just starting to lift as I reached the BART station. San Francisco mornings always carried that strange mix of chill and noise. Brakes squealing, people hurrying past with their coffee cups, everyone looking like they were already late for something. I blended right in, portfolio tucked under my arm, trying to keep my nerves from showing. The train arrived in a gust of wind and the smell of metal and electricity. I stepped inside, gripping the cold rail while the car filled with the usual mix of commuters, suits staring at their phones, construction workers half asleep, and a couple of students sharing headphones. I found a seat by the window, adjusted my tie, and pulled out my folder. Inside were the designs I'd spent months refining. Efficiency models, new hydraulic layouts, sketches that had earned compliments from my old supervisor but never a raise. I'd memorized every project Montgomery Corporation had touched in the last 5 years. Late nights after Noah was asleep had turned into quiet study sessions, me reading reports until my eyes burned. This wasn't just an interview. It was the moment I'd been building toward ever since Sarah's accident left me alone with a little boy and a stack of bills that seemed impossible to dent. The train rattled through tunnels, each stop echoing with metallic thuds. I tried to picture the day ahead. A polished conference room, a panel of executives, a chance to prove that someone like me, someone who didn't go to Ivy League schools or play golf with the right people, could still belong in their world. If I nailed this, I could finally breathe again. The announcer's voice crackled overhead. Next stop, Montgomery Station. I glanced at my watch. 9:15, perfect timing. I gathered my papers, smoothed my jacket, and stood as the train slowed. Through the smudged window, I could see it. The Montgomery Corporation building, towering over the street, all glass and promise. Just 2 blocks away. 15 minutes. That's all I needed to walk there. Take the elevator up to the 14th floor, and sit across from the people who held my future in their hands. When the doors opened, the first thing I noticed was the sound, deep, low, and wrong. The kind of rumble that doesn't belong to traffic or trains. The floor trembled under my feet, just enough to make me grab the nearest pole. Then the world went sideways. At first, it felt like the train was still moving, like maybe I'd lost my balance. But the shaking got worse, so strong the overhead lights swung violently, glass breaking somewhere in the distance. People screamed. The ground seemed to breathe beneath us, pushing and pulling like something alive. The air filled with the sound of metal grinding and distant crashes that echoed like thunder. A ceiling panel dropped behind me, scattering dust across my jacket. I ducked, heart pounding, as the train lurched forward and then stopped dead. Earthquake. Someone shouted it from the far end of the platform, and just hearing the word made everything feel sharper, realer. I clung to a support beam, my portfolio falling from my hands, papers scattering across the concrete like a storm of white leaves. For maybe 30 seconds, everything roared, the station, the walls, the sound of fear. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. Silence. A deep, fragile silence, broken only by sirens in the distance and people calling out to each other. My body was shaking, but not from fear, just from the aftershock of knowing how close we'd come to disaster. I bent down to collect my papers, my fingers trembling. My watch said 9:20. 10 minutes left. The building was still standing. I could make it if I ran. I took one step toward the exit, and that's when I heard it. A voice. Faint, hoarse, cutting through the quiet like a thread of desperation. Help. Please, someone help me. I froze. It came from somewhere nearby, an alley just off the main street. My heart pounded in my chest. I should keep walking. I'd worked 6 months for this chance. But my legs had other plans. I turned toward the sound. The alley was narrow, half hidden between 2 office buildings, filled with smoke, dust, and the faint ringing sound that always follows disaster. I hesitated for a second, clutching my folder like it mattered, like my life still revolved around what was on those pages. But then the voice came again, weaker this time. Please, I can't move. And all that ambition drained out of me. I dropped the folder and ran toward the sound. The air smelled like concrete and electricity. My shoes crunched over broken glass. I rounded the corner and saw her. A woman, maybe mid-30s, trapped beneath a slab of concrete that had fallen from the building's facade. One leg was pinned at an angle that made my stomach twist, her black blazer coated in dust and streaked with blood. Her face was pale except for a thin line of red running from her forehead to her cheek. Our eyes met through the haze, hers wide, frightened, desperate. Please, she whispered. I can't feel my leg. That was all it took. Every logical thought about time, opportunity, or money vanished. My body moved before my brain caught up. I knelt beside her, brushing away debris with my hands, assessing like an engineer because it was the only way I knew how to stay calm. The concrete looked to weigh around 200 pounds, pressing hard into her shin. Her pulse was erratic. The bleeding was bad enough that if it didn't stop soon, she'd go into shock. Hey, I said softly, forcing steadiness into my voice. You're okay now. I've got you. She tried to speak, but I stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. Don't talk. Just stay awake, all right? I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice came through, shaky but professional, asking for location and details. When I described the scene, she told me ambulances were delayed all across the city. Too many injuries. Too few crews. Can you stay with her? She asked. Can you provide basic first aid? I looked at my watch. 9:25, 5 minutes until my interview. My future waiting 2 blocks away while this woman's life balanced on minutes. Yeah, I said, swallowing hard. Tell me what to do. I tore off my tie, navy blue, the only one I owned, and used it as a tourniquet just above her knee. She screamed, and I winced with her, tightening the knot until the bleeding slowed. I know, I murmured. I know it hurts, but you're doing great. Just keep looking at me. Her hand clutched mine, trembling. You shouldn't. You have somewhere to be. Nowhere more important than here. I lied, pressing down on the wound to keep pressure. I scanned the ground for leverage, found a piece of broken wood from a crate, and shoved it under the edge of the concrete. All right, on three, I said, more to myself than to her. I pushed with everything I had, muscles shaking, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The slab lifted just enough for me to drag her leg free. Her cry of pain echoed off the alley walls, but she was alive. I laid my jacket under her head, tore my dress shirt into strips, and wrapped the wounds as tightly as I could. The air filled with the sound of sirens growing closer. Stay with me, I said. What's your name? Claire, she whispered. Claire. Montgomery. I'm Ethan, I said. You're safe now, Claire. Help's coming. She nodded faintly, eyes fluttering. You'd saved me. Not yet, I said. Just hang in there. By the time the paramedics arrived, my hands were covered in blood that wasn't mine, and my shirt looked like it had been through a war. They worked fast, lifting Claire onto a stretcher and praising my quick thinking. One of them clapped my shoulder. You probably saved her leg, maybe her life. I nodded numbly, watching as they loaded her into the ambulance. Her eyes met mine one more time. Her lips moved. Maybe, thank you. Maybe something else, but I couldn't hear the words. Then the doors shut, and the sirens faded down the street. I stood there, surrounded by broken glass and silence, realizing what had just happened. My tie was gone. My suit was ruined. My hands were shaking. I looked down the street toward the Montgomery Corporation building, still standing, its glass walls reflecting the chaos below. I could go. I could still walk in there, blood-stained and late, and beg for a second chance. But I didn't move. I just stood there, in that alley filled with dust and debris, knowing that I had made the only choice I could live with. I don't know how long I stood there after the ambulance disappeared, 5 minutes, maybe 10, but it felt like time had lost all meaning. My hands were stiff from dried blood, and the front of my shirt looked like a crime scene. The dust clung to my hair, to my skin, to the inside of my throat. I was still shaking, not from fear, but from everything that had just happened. The adrenaline, the helplessness, the strange calm that came after doing something that mattered more than anything else. Eventually, I started walking toward the Montgomery building anyway, moving like a man caught between two worlds. Each step felt heavier than the last. My tie was gone, my shirt was torn, and my jacket, what was left of it, was streaked with grime and blood. But I kept walking. Maybe part of me still believed I could salvage something. Maybe I just didn't know what else to do. The lobby was chaos. People were filing out in groups, some crying, others on their phones, trying to reach loved ones. The air smelled like burnt wires and panic. A security guard shouted directions near the elevators while a receptionist juggled a dozen phone calls. I walked up to her desk, still clutching the ruined folder that had once carried my future. Excuse me, I said, my voice hoarse. I had an interview scheduled. 14th floor. Engineering position. She didn't even glance up at first, just said, all interviews are canceled today, sir. Buildings being evacuated for safety checks. When will they be rescheduled? I asked. She looked up then and froze for a split second when she saw me. A man covered in dust and blood standing in a corporate lobby will do that. I'm sorry, she stammered. We don't know yet. You'll get an email when they reopen scheduling. Please step outside with everyone else. Her words hit harder than I expected. I nodded, mumbling something like, thank you, and stepped back into the street. The sound of sirens echoed through the city, ambulance lights flashing against glass walls. I walked until I found a bench 2 blocks away and sat down, the weight of everything catching up to me at once. The folder slid from my hand and landed on the pavement. A few papers slipped out and fluttered down the sidewalk. I didn't bother chasing them. I just sat there, staring at my blood-stained cuffs, my ruined suit, The way my reflection looked in the window of a parked car, like someone who'd lost everything and gained nothing in return. Then my phone buzzed. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe it was the company apologizing, offering to reschedule. But when I opened the email, my stomach sank. From Montgomery Corporation HR. Subject: Interview cancellation notice. Dear Mr. Walker, due to today's earthquake, all scheduled interviews have been canceled. We will not be rescheduling at this time. Thank you for your interest in Montgomery Corporation. Not rescheduled. Not postponed. Canceled. Just like that, 6 months of preparation gone in a single sentence. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, phone dangling loosely from my hand. I thought about Noah waiting at school, about how I'd promised him pizza every Friday when I got this job. I thought about the bills sitting on the kitchen table and the gray walls of our apartment that suddenly felt smaller than ever. But then I saw her face again. The woman in the alley, Claire, her eyes finding mine through the dust, trusting me completely in those 5 terrible minutes. I remembered how fragile she'd felt when I lifted that slab, how she'd clung to my voice to stay conscious. And it hit me. If I'd walked away from her that morning to make it to that interview on time, I wouldn't be able to look at myself now. Not in the mirror. Not in my son's eyes. So yeah, I'd lost the job. Maybe the chance of a lifetime. But I'd done the right thing, the only thing that mattered. I sat there until the adrenaline faded and the city noise started to sound normal again. Then I stood, brushed off my jacket, and started walking toward Noah's school. The streets were cracked, the sidewalks scattered with debris, but the world was still standing. And so was I. The next few days blurred together in that strange, heavy way that follows disaster. The city buzzed with cleanup crews, broken glass, and endless news coverage. Everywhere you looked, there were people sweeping sidewalks, patching windows, and pretending that life had gone back to normal. But for me, normal didn't feel possible anymore. I went back to work at the small engineering firm 3 days later. Same desk, same flickering fluorescent light overhead, same outdated equipment that rattled whenever the air conditioning kicked in. My coworkers asked about the earthquake, if I was okay, and I told them I was fine. Nobody asked about the interview. I didn't volunteer the story either. It was easier to let it die quietly than to relive the details. At home, I made dinner for Noah like I always did. We ate spaghetti from chipped bowls and talked about his science project, his favorite cartoons, and what kind of pizza we'd have when Daddy got his big new job. I smiled and nodded, even though I knew that job was gone for good. He didn't need to know that part yet. Some truths could wait. At night, after Noah fell asleep, I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee that always went cold before I finished it. I'd replay the moment in the alley, her voice, her eyes, the smell of concrete and dust. I'd wonder if she made it out okay. The paramedics said she would, but I hadn't seen her since. I didn't even know her last name. All I had was the memory of her face and the echo of her saying, "You shouldn't stay. You have somewhere to be." Maybe I did once. But now, it felt like that moment had rewritten my life in a way no job ever could. Still, bills didn't stop coming just because I'd done the right thing. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and my car needed repairs I couldn't afford. I took on extra hours at the shop, small repair contracts nobody else wanted. I came home exhausted most nights, but I kept going. Because what else could I do? Sometimes, when the city went quiet, I'd wonder if anyone even knew what I'd done that morning. Not the company, not the world, just me, standing there covered in dust, making a choice that cost everything and gave nothing back. But then I'd look at Noah sleeping peacefully in his bed, the streetlight catching his hair, and I'd remind myself why I'd done it. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to be the kind of man my son could look up to. 3 weeks passed. The world kept moving, as it always does, until the memories started to fade into the rhythm of work, rent, and routine. I'd almost stopped thinking about her, until the day I walked into the Mill Cafe on Divisadero Street. It was my lunch break. The place was crowded, like always, full of freelancers tapping away at laptops and people trying to escape the noise of their offices. I liked it there. It smelled like strong coffee and warm bread, and nobody bothered me. I ordered my usual, found a corner table, and opened my laptop to tinker with a project. Half an hour passed before I noticed her. She was sitting 2 tables away, hair neatly styled, a slim black cane resting beside her chair. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But then she turned her head, and I saw the faint scar above her eyebrow, just where the blood had been that morning. It was her. Claire. She looked different, healthier, composed, but her eyes were the same ones that had locked onto mine through dust and panic, the same eyes that had made me forget everything else. My chest tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just sat there staring, my heart beating faster than it had in weeks. I'd spent 3 weeks wondering if she was even alive, and now here she was, 10 feet away, sipping coffee like any other Tuesday. She didn't notice me at first. She was scrolling through her phone, focused, calm. But when she stood to grab her drink from the counter, we moved at the same time and nearly collided. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, stepping back automatically. Then her gaze lifted to my face, and I watched recognition wash over her expression like a wave. Her eyes widened. Her hand trembled just slightly on the cup. "It's you." I didn't know what to say. "Hi," I managed awkwardly. "How's your leg?" Claire stared for a moment, her lips parting like she was trying to decide if this was real. "I've been looking for you," she said finally, her voice low and trembling. "For weeks. The police couldn't find you. The security footage was too blurry. I didn't even know your name." She swallowed, tears welling in her eyes. "You saved my life, and then you disappeared." For a second, I just stood there, still holding my coffee like an idiot, not sure what to do with the fact that the woman I'd dragged out of the rubble was standing right in front of me, very much alive. I'd imagined this moment 100 different ways, me seeing her on a news segment, or maybe passing her in traffic someday. But none of those versions had prepared me for her looking at me like that. Her voice broke the silence first. "Can we talk, please?" I nodded and followed her to a corner table by the window. She sat carefully, placing her cane against the wall, and for the first time I saw the full picture. The limp, the scar, the faint tremor in her hands. But she was alive, breathing, smiling faintly, and that alone felt like enough. "I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to thank you," she said. "The doctors told me I could have lost my leg. They said if you hadn't stopped the bleeding." Her voice trailed off as she looked down at her cup. "You saved my life, Ethan." I opened my mouth to downplay it, but the words caught in my throat. I just did what anyone would have done. Her eyes lifted to mine, and she gave a small, knowing smile. "You and I both know that's not true." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that's more comfortable than awkward. Then she asked, "What were you doing there that day?" "You were dressed for something important, I could tell." I hesitated before answering. "I had an interview. Final round. Montgomery Corporation." Her expression froze, and for a brief second, I couldn't read what was happening behind her eyes. She leaned forward slowly. "Montgomery Corporation?" "Yeah," I said, nodding. I'd passed 2 rounds already. Worked 6 months preparing for that one. They canceled everything after the quake. Didn't reschedule. She set her coffee down and stared at me like she'd just connected 2 impossible dots. "What's your full name?" "Ethan Walker," I said carefully. "Why?" She let out a breath that trembled on the way out. "I can't believe this." Then she gave a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. "Ethan, I'm Claire Montgomery." The name didn't register right away. Then it hit me like a slow, rolling shock. "Wait, Montgomery, like the company Montgomery?" She nodded. "My father's the CEO. I'm the HR director. I was on my way to that same building that morning. The alley. You found me in the alley behind it." For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The noise of the cafe faded until all I could hear was my own heartbeat. "I didn't know," I said finally. "I didn't even think to ask your last name. You were just someone who needed help," she finished softly. "And you gave it without hesitation. You walked away from an opportunity that could have changed your life." "I didn't walk away from anything," I said quietly. "I made a choice I could live with." Her eyes glistened a little. "Ethan, you have no idea how many times I've gone over that day in my head. When I saw your name on the list of canceled interviews, I realized what had happened. I wanted to find you, to make it right." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not true," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "You earned that interview. And if I can give you another chance." "No." The word came out sharper than I meant it to. I took a breath and lowered my tone. "Thank you, but no. If I ever get another opportunity, I need to know it's because I earned it, not because someone felt sorry for me. That's just how I'm wired." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening into something warmer, deeper. "You really mean that, don't you?" I nodded. "Yeah, I do," She smiled faintly, then said, "What if it's not about work at all? What if it's just about getting to know the man who saved my life?" I blinked, caught off guard. "You mean?" "I mean coffee," she said with a little laugh. "No job offers. No hidden agenda. Just two people talking. Friends, maybe." Something in her tone disarmed me completely. There was no pity, no sense of obligation, just a quiet sincerity that felt right. I smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." And that's how it started. We met again the next week, and then the week after that. Sometimes it was at the same cafe, sometimes somewhere closer to my work. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. Her recovery, my son, the chaos of balancing life when nothing ever seems stable. She was easy to talk to, the kind of person who listened with her whole face, like every word mattered. Somewhere between those coffees and long conversations, something shifted. I stopped seeing her as the woman I'd saved and started seeing her as someone who might just save me, too. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow kind of change, the kind that sneaks up on you when you're not looking for it. Claire and I started meeting regularly, always casual, always friendly. She'd ask about Noah, and I'd ask about her leg. Sometimes she'd bring her laptop, saying she liked to work near someone who actually enjoys his coffee instead of inhaling it. I laughed the first time she said that, but she wasn't wrong. Eventually, she met Noah. It happened naturally, one Saturday morning at the park when she offered to join us. She brought a small bag of spare mechanical parts she'd picked up from a flea market, saying, "I thought your little engineer might have fun with these." Noah's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. From that moment on, he was hooked. Watching them together did something to me. She wasn't pretending to like him or forcing conversation. She genuinely cared. She asked about his projects, listened when he explained how gears worked, and even let him talk her ear off about robots. For a woman who had probably spent most of her life in boardrooms, she looked right at home sitting on a park bench with a 7-year-old and a paper bag full of bolts. Over the next few months, Claire became part of our lives in small, unplanned ways. She'd swing by our apartment with takeout when I worked late. She helped Noah with his science fair project. Sometimes she'd just sit with me on the steps after dinner, watching the city lights come on one by one. There was no agenda, no pressure, just the kind of quiet companionship I hadn't realized I'd been missing. One evening, after Noah was asleep, Claire and I talked about work. She mentioned that her father, the CEO, had been impressed by the way I handled the rescue, even though he only knew about it from her side of the story. Then she hesitated, swirling her tea in her cup before saying, "Ethan, I know you don't want handouts, but what if you built something of your own?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You told me once you've thought about starting a consulting business, taking on independent engineering projects instead of working for someone else. You've got the skills, the experience, the work ethic. You're just missing the connections." "Connections?" I repeated. "You mean people like your father?" She nodded carefully. "Not for favors. Just introductions. You'd earn every client yourself." I'd just open the door. At first, I wanted to say no. Pride had always been both my anchor and my chain. But then I thought about Noah, how hard I'd worked to give him a life that still felt small and uncertain. Maybe pride wasn't the thing I needed most right now. Maybe what I needed was courage, the courage to build something new. "Okay," I said slowly, "but with conditions. No special treatment. Just introductions to people who actually need the work done. If they hire me, it's because I'm good at what I do." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that reached her eyes. Deal. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Claire kept her word. She introduced me to a few contacts, smaller firms that needed help with design problems or system upgrades. I filed the paperwork, registered my business as Walker Engineering Solutions, and even let Noah design the logo. He drew a little robot holding a wrench, and I put it on the website like it was the proudest thing I'd ever owned. My first client was a small manufacturing plant in Oakland. The project was messy, but I poured everything I had into it. They were so impressed that they referred me to another company. Then another. Within a few months, I was busier than I'd ever been, working longer hours, but for myself this time. For once, the effort meant something. Through it all, Claire was there, not as a benefactor, not as someone I owed, but as a friend. She showed up at Noah's school events, brought dinner when I was too buried in projects to cook, and laughed at my terrible jokes like they were worth hearing. Somewhere between the spreadsheets, late-night coffee, and quiet talks on the porch, I started to realize what was really happening. I was falling for her. Not in some reckless, desperate way. It was gentler than that, deeper. It was in the way her voice softened when she talked to Noah, in the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, in the peace that settled over the room whenever she was near. One night, while tucking Noah in, he looked at me and said, "Daddy, do you like Claire?" "Of course I do, buddy. She's our friend." He frowned, thinking hard. "No, I mean like her. The way you liked Mom." I didn't know what to say. My throat went tight. "It's complicated," I said finally. Noah shrugged in that simple way kids do. "Mommy said love is brave, even when it's scary." That one stayed with me long after he fell asleep. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of good things. It took me a week to gather the nerve, but one Saturday night, I finally did it. I called Claire and asked her if she'd like to have dinner with me. Just the two of us. No Noah. No casual coffee. No pretending it was about work or friendship. There was a short pause on the phone, and then she said yes in that calm, steady way she always did, like she'd been waiting for me to ask all along. We met at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. When she walked in, every sound in the room seemed to fade. She was wearing a simple dark blue dress, her hair down for once, and she looked effortless. The waiter might have been talking, but I didn't hear a word. Halfway through dinner, after the wine arrived, I finally found my courage. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, "and I might ruin everything by saying it." Her eyes met mine, curious and calm. "Try me." I exhaled, steadying myself. "I care about you, Claire. A lot. Probably more than I should. And it scares the hell out of me because the last time I loved someone, I lost everything. I don't want to lose what we have by saying the wrong thing, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." She smiled gently and reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "Then let me ruin it first," she said. "Because I've been falling for you for months, Ethan." I tried not to, but here we are. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Relief, joy, and something softer, all tangled together. I laughed quietly, half out of disbelief. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure about you," she said. After that night, we didn't rush anything. We didn't need to. What we had wasn't built on infatuation or escape. It was built on the kind of trust that only comes from surviving something together. She met my neighbor Mrs. Chun, who'd basically adopted Noah and me after Sarah's death. I met Claire's father, not as a job candidate this time, but as the man dating his daughter. That meeting was its own kind of earthquake, but even he couldn't argue with what he saw between us. The months rolled by. Walker Engineering Solutions grew, slow, steady, but real. I hired 2 employees. I rented a small office near the wharf, nothing fancy but mine. On the desk sat 2 framed photos, one of Sarah, me, and baby Noah from the early days when everything still felt new and unbreakable. And next to it, one of the 3 of us now, me, Claire, and Noah, standing on a windy beach, squinting into the sun with sand in our hair and laughter on our faces. Sometimes I catch myself staring at those photos during late nights in the office. One showed where I came from. The other showed where I'd finally landed. Both were part of the same story. A year after the earthquake, Claire texted me while I was reviewing blueprints. "Claire, dinner tonight? Noah wants to show me his new robot." Me, "Perfect. I'll bring dessert." I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair. The sun was setting over the bay, throwing orange light across the room, and for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't waiting for something better to start. I was already living it. That earthquake had shaken my world apart, but in doing so, it stripped away everything that didn't matter. The illusion of control, the fear of starting over, the idea that success had to come from someone else's approval. What was left was something honest, something mine. I didn't get the job I thought I wanted, but I built a life I never knew I could have. And maybe that's how life works sometimes. The ground gives way, the walls fall down, and for a while, all you can see is the dust. But if you hold your ground, if you keep faith in the small, quiet choices, you can build something stronger out of the ruins. That night, when I came home, Noah ran to the door with his latest creation, a robot made from scrap metal and imagination. Claire followed him in, laughing, carrying a bag of takeout and 2 bottles of wine. "Hey," she said softly, smiling at me from the doorway. "Hey," I said back, realizing that after everything, the quake, the loss, the rebuilding, this was what peace looked like.